Arab Spring movement have actually said that it was extremely effective. So I don't know if Harshji, Sandeep, you have thoughts on this, because a lot of our media fellows, one of our former fellows who works on a very interesting project, Sukhanshu Chaudhary, works on democratizing media, और उन्होंने शुरू किया है छत्तीसगढ़ नेट, और वो कोशिश कर रहे हैं कि गोंडी में लोग मोबाइल के जरिए अपनी बातों को पहुंचा सकें। उनका कहना था कि जो भी आप ये सारी चर्चा कर रहे हैं ये तो कॉर्पोरेट मीडिया है, अंततः ये जो सोशल मीडिया है उसी से हमें कुछ उम्मीदें नजर आती हैं।
Hey, I think that social media reaches a certain class of people today. It might reach a larger class. And how can one say that one shouldn't use instruments of communication? What Shubham was saying earlier, I feel that our leadership today, it's failing to explain its reasons, but it's failing to communicate them as well. It might actually have put reasons down on a file, but still doesn't feel, the need to stand up, have the, boys were throwing stones in Kashmir. I really would have liked the Prime Minister to go and sit with those boys in the jail and say, what's your problem? What is the act? Let's talk. I mean, we cannot have, in today's world particularly, leadership that does not communicate. And social media is one instrument of communication. But on that, I just wanted to add that there's a danger as well, because let us we assume that in the Jessica Lal case, it happened that somebody sent an SMS and then somebody else sent an SMS. So there's a whole middle class upsurge arose from a spontaneous process. But we learn in, say, the Anna movement, it said that marketing companies were employed to use the same media like a marketing company to manipulate what looks like a spontaneous upsurge in the social media can actually be managed. And I think that's a danger that we need to be mindful of. And that the social media also lends itself to manipulation in a very systematic, organized way. But talking about the complexities, to say that, for instance, the claim that this one bill is going to reduce 65% of corruption, I found that particular claim especially interesting. I mean, that you've calculated, actually people will imagine that you sat down and said it's not 70%, it's not 60%, it's actually 65. I think that that kind of claim, I believe that a large number of people started joining that movement perhaps for the first time. I really worried most of all about the disillusionment. When 65% corruption doesn't end, even if we get this law. And that there are other issues that we have to address. And I think that one of them is about looking inward. और जो कहते हैं कि गांव में गरीब लोगों के बीच में भी कि आज भी कहीं शादी हो रही है तो कहते हैं कि ऊपर की कमाई होगी तो ज़्यादा दहेज देंगे. It means that not only do you have no problem with having a son-in-law who is corrupt, is a corrupt public official, but you will actually pay a higher dowry for such a person. I think there's a need to reflect on the legitimization of corruption around us. I was in the civil service. I mean, I used to say that my father also was. In my father's time, the person who was corrupt, they were corrupt people, but they were isolated. People used to identify them and they used to be in the periphery. Now it is that the honest guy is sort of saying, yeah, actually, I agree, I'm corrupt, but that's my only flaw. Don't just marginalize me completely. I mean, there is a whole, what do we celebrate and who do we celebrate as our heroes? There are very different kinds of heroes. Heroes who have given up, wealth and a certain lifestyle and are living for public service. Very few of them are now emerging as the heroes of our times. So I think that there's issues of systemic reform. There's an understanding of what constitutes good government. Many of us, जो Transparency International का एक रेटिंग होता है कि सबसे करप्ट गवर्नमेंट कौन सा है, अगला कौन सा है, and we all wait for that. बहुत लोग कम बहुत कम लोग ये जानते हैं कि वो इंडेक्स कैसे बनता है। पहले कि it's not based on any objective criteria, it is a perception index. But what is even more interesting is whose perception? It is exclusively a business perception index. It's not even also the street vendor business. It is that you ask organized business which government you regard to be corrupt and less corrupt, and on the basis of that you construct an index, and that becomes the last word about which is corrupt and which is not corrupt. What will look like a corrupt government to a private corporation might not look a corrupt government to a landless worker or a Dalit who's struggling, or somebody whose land is getting displaced. And I think we need to reclaim the idea of good government for the poor. And the last point I'd like to make is why these issues are so complex, and we need to, I really welcome what Shuman said. We need to reintroduce the complexities of this debate. There was a time, even, when I joined the IS in 1998, at least the theory of government remained that government exists primarily for the poor, to defend and uphold the rights of the poor, the minorities, the Dalits, women, etc. The practice may have been very far from it. Today the theory of government has changed. The theory of government is that government is good, which facilitates economic growth and investment. And that is the yardstick that we have accepted, and it has permeated down right to the. So now, I when I deal with my own former colleagues, to stand up and say that I want a law or a policy for the poor, people look at you as if you're some kind of dinosaur who's not just a dinosaur but a deadweight of this country which is leaping ahead. And these people are still holding us back. That whole notion of looking at corruption, looking at government, looking at the role of the state, reclaiming the idea that the state derives its legitimacy, it's primarily from what it does for people who are weak in this world. I think that is the complexity that I'd like to bring about.
Thank you, Harshi. Just a final round, and that's going to be seeking your advice also. We've already talked of how the Anna movement was fairly narrowly defined. Obviously, there was no space for land rights questions, Adivasi rights, the minority question, and so on. Shoma, you did say that. On the other hand, we were looking at just institutional solutions to problems which are not just institutional in character. So, in some ways, we are looking at only the manifestations and not at the structural issues behind the problem. So in all this, if we are looking at transformative politics, if we are looking at emancipatory struggles, हम यहाँ जो लोग बैठे हैं आम तौर पर कम से कम हमारी उम्मीद है और हम लोग चाहते हैं कि हम ट्रांसफॉर्मेटिव स्ट्रगल्स के साथ जुड़कर काम कर सकें। तो आज कहाँ उम्मीद नज़र आती है और क्या हम लोग कर सकते हैं? बड़ा सवाल है बहुत से हम लोगों के। मैं एक बात और कह दूँ, मतलब मुझे अचानक याद आ गया कि राजीव भार्गव को आप सब लोग जानते होंगे और हम लोगों को पढ़ाते थे, and we used to love him because he would make things fairly simple for us. And recently he was talking somewhere and he said that the real battle is not between people who are pro-democracy and anti-democracy. It's about different conceptions of democracy. एक conception की बात कर रहे हैं जहाँ वो कह रहे हैं people who have power are willing to give violence for votes. The second is, he says, liberal democracy, जिसमें बात करते हैं rights की, rule of law की, but it's largely the people who have economic and cultural resources who access it. But the third is, which talks of more enlarging and deepening the public sphere. How do you make state accountable and questions of transformative justice. Last शब्द उन्होंने नहीं कहा था, because that's really our project. तो इस पूरे बदलाव में जो हम देख रहे हैं, कहाँ हम लोग उम्मीदें देख रहे हैं? संदीप आपसे शुरू करें। नहीं, आपसे। अच्छा, ठीक है।
I again, that's a whole universe of questions sometimes. So I'm just going to probably stick with the media for the time being. If I really think of the transformative power of the media, that's where it lies, you know. Because in a democracy like ours, I don't think there's any broad brush that can change everything overnight. I think Harsh made a very important point, which is that we must remind ourselves what governments are for. You know? Right now, I think, again, it's a weird time we're living in, because I've always been somebody who's wanted welfare schemes. But this government is going to such an extent of just goals and goals and goals. Let's ask people's movements on the ground. Change comes slowly, you know. I really believe that societies are dialogic. We should not have a grand vision of how this society will change overnight, how this country will change. 63 years later, many things have happened. You know, even as we all decry how nothing has happened, many things have happened. You know, many aspects of us, many margins of our society who could never dream of having a voice, today have a voice. A lot of social turbulence, change, all of that has happened. And the media too has played a role in that. You know. So today, if I were to focus on the strength of this democracy, it is the media. We are a very loud, you know, cacophonous, many-headed media, even the corporate media. And you know, that again is a complex thing. Even Tehelka today cannot survive without some amount of corporate investment, with some amount of advertisement. You can't fight every battle. But you hope that if there's so many media groups, then some people will fight some battles, some people will fight some other battles, and so in its own way, many battles will get fought, you know. If you were to dismantle the big media, you would be left with many small voices, which would not have impact. The big riddle for Tehelka, and I'm giving Tehelka as an example only to explain why it is important even to have corporate media, is that you want the voice. I think the maxim we use is that you use the money of the rich to tell the stories of the poor. And you try and tell it to the people who wield power. If we were only speaking to the converted, if we were only speaking in black and white journals that are reaching 10,000 people, it is important. It's important for all of that to exist because you need to strengthen each other. The converted need to strengthen each other. You need to speak to the converted. But equally, you need the larger voices, that is carrying your voices to men like Sandeep and others who wield power. You need corporates who actually wield a lot of power. You need to persuade them. So you need those bridges. And those bridges may be semi-compromised, very compromised, middlingly compromised, but they need to exist. And if you have the push of social media, you have the push of men like Subhranshu who are trying to give voice, all of that becomes the creative cocktail out of which a democracy survives.
Thank you. Harshi?
Again, too many things, but I'll say 2 or 3. The first is we need to preserve, strengthen, deepen spaces for social dissent. I recall Roosevelt in 1933, I think, they worked out this whole plan for the revival of the economy with the trade union. And then he said, go out and make me do it now. And I think that was such a wonderful thing to remember, that the people who are out there fighting government are actually your allies. And that if we can have a leadership which is able to look at social dissent, organized social dissent, unorganized social dissent, across its very creative range that you see in India, as actually your partner in democratic transformation. I think that's one thing that I'd really like to see. The second is responding a little bit to what Shobhan said earlier. I believe as a country, our biggest problem is an extreme comfort level with inequality. We've lived with it for too long. We don't have an outrage. And I often say this when I work with homeless children. You know, on a cold winter night when I tuck my daughter in, after she's had a great meal, she's played on her video, she's had got to the best school, etc. I don't worry, even for a minute, that 8 kilometers दूर इसी उम्र की एक और बच्ची है जो सारी रात ठंड में सोएगी. Somebody will sexually abuse her. She's found her by picking rags. She'll never see the inside of the school. The fact that it doesn't worry us is to me the heart of the problem. And therefore I do believe, you might call it goals, you might call it whatever. I believe as a society, we must decide on a floor of human dignity. We must decide that whatever we might do, today, no child should sleep hungry. No child should have to sleep under the open sky. No one should die because they can't afford health care. Let's agree on, say, these 2 or 3 things. And let us say that whatever it costs, we will find the resources. Because I have a stake. Equally, I have a stake that my daughter should not grow up uncaring of that other child who's sleeping out there. So I believe that we do need to make much larger social investments for a floor of human dignity. Beyond that, let our enterprise, I don't care whether you work or you don't work, let's at least agree that every second child cannot remain vulnerable. I'm not going to talk about incentivizing something, I'm not going to talk. Let's accept a certain baseline of human dignity in today's, today's resources enable us to do that. And let us put an end to hunger, let us put an end to homelessness. Let us decide on children hours. Let's decide on that. That's my second point. And the last is really about to ask about where do I derive hope. See, I have the, I feel privileged that I've chosen to do a lot of my work among very, very poor people, living in hunger, who are homeless and people victims of mass conflict. And I find, and this sounds romantic, I find so much more pluralism and instinctive respect for diverse faiths. To talk about Gujarat today, for me, the story of Gujarat is much less after these 10 years that there was such brutality. Because for every act of brutality today, I can find you 3 stories of extreme kindness in those same. We had one Shingar, we have a Shingar in every street corner. I can say that. That is for me also the story of Gujarat. Or when I right here in Jama Masjid, when I finish with that, you have people who hire out blankets and quilts to the homeless at 30 rupees a night, and they have to make a choice between their need or having something to cover themselves. But when I go out, I noticed one thing very strange, and I found that the very old, the very sick, the people who have died through the night, always had blankets. And I inquired, how does this happen? Because really it was 20 years, that nobody could afford it. And they said that, the other homeless people, the able-bodied people, said that very candid, very matter of fact, that we know that these people will die through the night. And therefore, we gather at night and first pool money to ensure that these people get there. Then if we can afford it, we hire it, if we don't. And it taught me that for them, what